Thank you very much, Di, Steve. Thanks to all of you. It's incredible Australian hospitality, and to have so many friends and colleagues and comrades to enjoy the next few days, I'm exceedingly grateful. I was very moved by the presentation this morning, and this is my objective. So, thinking about all the patients we care for in the ICU, we really need to step back and think of us all as individuals in the community, all the people around us, our family members, however we define family, our friends, workmates, obviously, in the ICU, in the hospital setting, and other community members, be they in the gym, in the stable, in our place of faith, or even in the pub. When we become critically ill, all of those other people just get labeled in one big sort of pot as visitors. We have visiting hours, we have visiting rules, we have special visiting regulations, and everyone around the patient, previously a citizen, is really defined by various healthcare provider roles. And essentially, we may lose the identity of the patient when we care for them. We've all seen images like this every day. We are desensitized to these images. We can't even tell if there's a body on the bed. We can't see if it's a man or a woman. We don't know anything about the person. And increasingly, there are articles written by patients who survive or family members, like this one a while ago in intensive care medicine, asking rhetorically, is ICU a special branch of hell? The language we use can be dehumanizing, and we don't mean to dehumanize, but we have nomenclature referring to people like bed 3, the lady with sepsis. We refer to people based on the technology we are applying to them, the Prisma guy, or even blame language. She bought herself an endotracheal tube. We have scripts, we have shortcuts, we have e-handovers, templates, and obviously many of the digital assistive devices have helped us to be more efficient. But they've also potentially become a barrier in the way we look after patients. And you've probably seen a number of articles and actually books asking questions, again, rhetorical, maybe not. Do you really know your eye patient? Studies have been done showing that residents actually spend more time in front of the computer than at the bedside. When people become critically ill, it's an existential crisis we never label. Again, we're used to it. Existential questions are posed by patients if they're sapient, or commonly, more commonly, family members, and sometimes by us, if we really stop and think, as caregivers. The questions about purpose, the purpose of this illness, the meaning of it, what it means for here and now, what it means for the future, about relationships, relationships past, present, relationships broken and foregone, and obviously issues about destiny from a practical perspective and perhaps more extemporaneously. There's this notion of spirituality that we don't talk about, which really recognizes that there are matters of incredible suffering before us and among us, and suffering and existential crisis are really matters far bigger than that with which we deal with every day in the ICU. That's led me to think a lot about sympathy and empathy and compassion and how this relates to our approach. And I hadn't really understood the differences between these terms until reading a PhD thesis of a young gentleman who lives in Calgary in Canada, who had adduced these data from interviewing patients and family members who've tried to express the differences. I thought you may find this interesting. The sympathy tends to be an ego-based response where there's a verbal reaction that we have to a phenomena, to a patient. It acknowledges suffering, and often the person receiving our sympathy may feel supported, or if it's not as authentic, person may feel pitied or a little bit patronized. Empathy is a little bit different, more emotional. It's verbal, of course, but is also effective. And it's meant to communicate, we see, we try to understand, or at least we acknowledge what's going on. And on the receiving end, and I'm sure some of you have had empathic conversations and been at the receiving end of empathy, it feels different. Compassion is the highest order. Compassion is more action-oriented, more virtuous. It's deliberately meant to ameliorate suffering that we see everywhere. And in fact, as experienced by patients in this PhD dissertation and as replicated in several other studies, compassion actually does decrease the suffering and may actually have an increase in well-being. You'd be surprised to know that in the world of critical care, based on this interesting article from Intensive Care Medicine, amongst all the attributes of physicians as only one group of clinicians in the ICU, compassion is rated as the top attribute. And I think this shocked the readers as well as the authors of this work. And keeping in mind the intense suffering that we see, particularly when patients die in the ICU, some of us in my hospital at St. Joseph's in Hamilton set out to do something that would actually try to enhance compassion in the ICU. And the overall goal, as you can see, was try to improve the dying experience for patients and their families. When we thought about it, we structured it according to a little bit of a research project for patients, obviously to try to dignify the death and celebrate the life of patients, for family members to try to replace some of the terrible auditory and tactile visual stimuli with more positive memories, and to try to foster a sense of vocation amongst clinicians with whom we work. The premise was to try to elicit or solicit and actually implement a number of interventions that could bring some peace to the final hours or days of a patient's life and a family's experience. And these wishes could be anybody's wishes. Patients, if they're able to express them, family member wishes, or even the ICU clinicians caring for the patient, and what we had originally as a 3 wishes team that has been abandoned, by the way, and our 3 wishes community are the clinicians. So there are qualitative and quantitative components, and as usual when describing critical care study, there are a number of demographics and physiologic variables. But our approach had really been descriptive to try to understand the lived experience of the family members after their loved ones had died, and the clinicians. We wanted to keep track of the cost of these wishes because there were some skeptics thinking, oh my gosh, we can't do this. We don't have time. We don't have time for extra acts of compassion. We're too busy doing the work, doing the tasks. And a component of this project was actually a sympathy card. You probably read a lot about the condolence card in the RCT by Kentish Barnes, which is a very different construct where the letter, the condolence letter, as it was called, was sort of a one-off letter, somewhat formulaic, and written by the patient's primary nurse and physician, which had more objectives than actually just enhancing and outreaching, giving compassion to the family member who died. And that condolence letter, RCT, suggested more anxiety and stress on behalf of family members receiving the condolence letter. And this sympathy card is very, very different. It is unstructured. It is invitational. All the people who've cared for the patient actually are invited to write in it. And our qualitative research shows what great meaning this offers. Here are just some examples of simple things that we've done. Humanizing the room. This is, the top is a picture of someone who brought in blankets from home, a gentleman's t-shirt, his favorite radio, his little black book, pictures, and a word cloud. Decorating the room for special occasion like Christmas, Valentine's Day. Mementos, locks of hair in a vial, final ECG strips for a young lad who died. Tributes to the patient. This was a patient who actually was in a band, and these are his buddies. They called themselves the Wingnuts, and they worked in a car factory. And you can see the lunacy of their visitation impairment and coverage by yellow gowns because the person had VRE. And we just invited them to come on in and have a great sing-along. And the patient was awake, one of our unusual patients who was awake, and he couldn't be more thrilled, but he was most moved by the fact that a young resident joined in and had the mariachi, and they were singing along to Neil Young. A gesture that nobody forgot. We've had rituals. This is renewal of a wedding vow, again, for a patient who was awake and decided she didn't want to be on the ventilator anymore, and a moving up of additional birthday wishes. How does this work? Well, the idea is anyone could elicit a wish. The wish could be wished by a family member. What is the wish? We categorize things, classical music, and this is an example of a nurse who just found Ave Maria on her iPhone, placed on the patient's pillow as the family members stood around for a final song and tribute. Another wish elicited by a bedside nurse of a patient who really wanted to see her dog. And the dog, everyone knows, sometimes animals are more treasured family members than persons in a family. So these are just some very simple things that can be done. Spiritually enhanced environment with flameless candles, taking a breath of fresh air. This is February in downtown Hamilton, and the snow has melted. This gentleman, he wanted to just go outside. He wanted Diet Pepsi, not Diet Coke. He just wanted to breathe fresh air, and there's his partner and his brother, the nurse, the RT, and a second RT playing his favorite music. We had a woman who was dying, and her husband came to visit, and actually he started to have massive hematemesis, and it turned out he had end-stage cancer, and he was admitted to our own ICU, and everyone was thinking, oh my gosh, they've got the same last name, we have to separate them, their blood work is going to get mixed up, it'll be a really big problem. And we said, no, they want to be together. Their wish is to be together. And we were able to put them, breaking all the rules, having them in the same room. So this is a quote from a resident. I'll let you read. Why not ask the question? For some people, their dignity is physical, having their hair done, having their nails done. This was a wish of a woman who was dying. It wasn't expressed by her, it was expressed by her daughter. Now, this nurse never had time to lie on the bed and paint nails because she has tasks to do, vitals to record, things to enact. Those are never more important than these. Gentleman was dying, and his family said, you know what? What does our family do when the going gets tough? We drink beer. And they all got together, brought in a pet dog, and had a little celebration. And as they say, we just tell lies in our family, tell tall tales and stories. I'll let you read this love letter written by a granddaughter. Her wish was simply to express her love. Our qualitative work helped us to understand how much it mattered. And our main findings were indeed that the Three Wishes Project helped to dignify the patient, or perhaps expressed better, honor the inherent dignity that everybody has. Ours is not dignity to give, but to see. giving voice to the family, and calling forth clinician compassion. So all these different categories of wishes have emerged over 5 years. The Three Wishes Project is going on in many, many centers in North America, and a few other surprises emerged. The postmortem connections. This was a fish tank of a gentleman who died, who suffered depression, and his family were telling us, oh my gosh, his house is a mess. These fish are nearly dead. Would anyone like these fish? And they began talking to the bedside nurse, who also had fish. And the family said, Jason, would you like to have Jack's fish? And Jason said, oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. I have fish already, and I know they're probably not very well. And the family said, well, we would love to give you this gift, Jack's fish. And he understood it wasn't just fish. The fish were everything. This was a postmortem connection and a paying it forward. And Jason totally cleaned the tank and got his own beautiful setup, and really saw this as a postmortem connection and a wish of a family for him as a bedside nurse who looked after Jack for 4 weeks. And it really changed the conversation by recognizing what was going on. A community of compassion. These from Halifax are young students who heard about the project, who are making blankets for their own 2 ICUs in Halifax in Eastern Canada. So what is a wish, really? What is it? Well, it's a process. It's in the asking. That's the heart of a wish. But it's also a product. Many ways to conceptualize wishes. Conversation starters to help us get to know patients, recognizing the patient, an example of dignity-conserving care. Some of these may connect for you. Transitional activities, and in our increasingly pluralistic society, maybe secular expressions of spirituality, tangible expressions of empathy, that is, acts of compassion. So we're reminded from years ago of one of the essential qualities of a clinician is interest in humanity. As we heard at the beginning of this morning's session. But for us in healthcare, the secret of the care of the patient is in actually caring for the patient. More and more people are writing about this today. Have we lost our way in healthcare? A mainstream article. What about all this burnout, this compassion fatigue, the vicarious suffering that we experience, and maybe we're more at risk for in the emerge and in the ICU? What can be done to help clinicians carry out this mission, this responsibility, this gift? I'm sure there are things that are going on in your own ICU. I just wanted to share one of ours. And rather than the distress and rather than the burnout, we can think about resilience, but it's got to be more. Our staff have spoken about how transformative this has been. This was the Last Supper for a family who hated each other. Their father was dying. They never saw each other. And they came together just at the end for a final supper in the nurse's lounge. And we got a sheet, a white sheet. Took all this crap off the table, got a white sheet as a tablecloth, and brought in some chicken wings and salad. And the family sat around and reconnected and had a sense of union on their father's final night. And that was very meaningful for them as us. So as we see with ICU, there's no end of increase in technology. And over my 28 years of practice, this is what I've seen with humanism. So this is one of the things we've tried to do in my own backyard. And this is why we keep going. Thanks. Sit down. Sit down.
Thank you. Thank you for that.